Well, the coming change in U.S. presidents could also entail significant changes in U.S. foreign policy, just as tensions are spiking in the Middle East. That has many in Israel worried. Earlier today, the country has warned its citizens against travel in the Gulf region as Iran is seething over the assassination of its top nuclear scientist, blaming the killing on Israel. Now, with its staunch ally leaving the White House, the Jewish state could face tougher times.
It's been 4 good years for Israeli conservatives, with a U.S. president who often gave them what they wanted.
Today, I repeat, I just want to say thank you for everything you've done for the state of Israel. You've been the greatest friend that Israel has had in the White House.
One of the Trump administration's first foreign policy moves was to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Like many actions to come, it was controversial. Palestinians consider East Jerusalem the capital of a future state. The Trump administration also recognized Israeli sovereignty over the contested Golan Heights region, captured by Israel in 1967 from Syria.
You can't stand here and stare out at what's across the border and deny the central thing that President Trump recognized that previous presidents had refused to do, that this is a part of Israel, and a central part of Israel.
Under Trump, Israel aggressively expanded its settlements in occupied Palestinian territory on the West Bank. The U.S. has taken steps to legitimize those settlements as Israeli land. One winemaker in a contested settlement was so happy he named a wine after Pompeo. U.S. diplomacy also cleared the way for agreements between Israel and longtime foes, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. They came together over a common enemy: Iran, which has long been considered an existential threat by Israeli governments. The Trump era saw the U.S. walk away from the Iran nuclear deal, which was meant to relieve sanctions on Tehran in exchange for strict controls on its nuclear program. But Netanyahu bitterly opposed it, saying it would allow Tehran to build nuclear weapons without interference. Last week, a senior Iranian nuclear scientist was killed in an ambush on Iranian territory. Tehran has blamed Israel and the U.S. Protests in Iran followed. With tensions so high, it may be more difficult for the incoming U.S. administration to re-enter the nuclear deal. As an end to the Trump era, that would suit some on the Israeli right just fine.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Jeremy Issacharoff, Israel's ambassador to Berlin. Thank you very much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
U.S. President-elect Joe Biden has said he wants to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal. That's a deal that is supported by Germany as well as the EU, by Russia and China, but opposed by Israel. So what is Israel going to do about this?
Look, I think one of the most important things is to recall what he said yesterday evening about the bottom line being to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And that has always been our goal. I think it's always been Germany's goal, and it's always been the goal of the P5+1 and the nuclear agreement. The question is, how do you achieve it? And one thing we've seen over the last months is very clear string of Iranian violations of the JCPOA, whether in terms of the amount of enriched uranium, the level of enriched uranium, the use of advanced centrifuges. So a whole string of violations alongside a very energetic and active missile program, as well as a continued destabilizing activity in the Middle East in general.
But so are you saying that the nuclear deal is not the right instrument to achieve that goal?
I'm saying that it's been seen that the nuclear deal as it was drafted in 2015 has been shown to have lacuna and gaps which need to be addressed. And clearly the steps taken by the Iranian government to violently destabilize the Middle East in general, continue their missile program, and violate the actual clear terms of the nuclear agreement, provide us with no confidence that the agreement is working.
What would provide you with confidence then?
Well, I think, first of all, look, let's be adjust ourselves to the present situation. There's a transition in Washington, and obviously a new American administration will have to address this. It'll take time to appoint the teams and the policies, to have consultations with partners like with Europe, and also, I would imagine, also with Israel. So I think it'll still take a bit of time to come and put the actual policy together.
So the deal is not dead, you're saying?
Look, we need to have an effective diplomacy which prevents Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And that, in my view, is very much dependent on these consultations that will happen in the weeks and months ahead to put together an effective and vibrant policy that will secure that goal.
Well, this week, a top Iranian nuclear scientist was assassinated. Tehran blames the attack on Israel. What's your comment?
Look, Iran blames Israel for virtually every ill in the Middle East, and from that point of view, I think it's more important to keep an eye on what Iran is doing. And again,
you're not denying it, but you're not confirming it either.
I'm not relating to it at all. They might have their speculations, and we've seen a number of times where they've said things that have proven to be untrue, particularly in terms of what they are supposed to be doing in terms of complying with the nuclear deal.
But it's a clear setback for Iran when their top scientist is no longer around. So,
well, I think it's a clear setback for Iran when it continues to pursue a nuclear weapons activity, when it continues to pursue missile development, and when it continues to interfere in the politics of Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. That is the thing that I think is the key thing that we need to keep an eye on.
Well, just today, Israel has warned its citizens in the region of an increased threat from Iran after this attack. So what intelligence is that warning based on? Well,
first of all, I remind the viewers that about 3 weeks ago, the Iranians placed improvised explosive devices on our border on the Golan Heights, in the southern part of the Golan Heights. And we identified this and we responded. So this is a very ongoing problem that we face vis-a-vis Iran. We face Iran's involvement in Syria. We face it's also in Lebanon. It's support of Hezbollah, providing Hezbollah with very extensive weaponry. So, this is an ongoing problem that we have, an ongoing threat, which is not just an abstract thing. It happens on the ground. So, I mean, obviously at this time, we're taking every precaution possible in every possible way. And this is something that we're being very clear about.
As an ambassador to Germany, can Germany and the EU help maintain stability in the Middle East and with regard to Iran especially?
Well, first of all, I think they can. And I think it's been very interesting that the first 2 visits of the Israeli Foreign Minister, Gabi Ashkenazi, abroad after the new government was established was to Germany, was to Berlin. The first to meet with Heiko Maas's counterpart, who we see as a great friend of Israel, and who just also recently improved Germany's voting record in the UN. He also met at the same time with 26 other foreign ministers of Europe. And the second time he came, he met with his UAE counterpart for the first bilateral and trilateral meeting between us. So I think this was a very clear example of how Germany can contribute to the new paradigm shift, the process of normalization and peace in the Middle East, which is happening, as opposed to the more negative threats that we've discussed before.
Jeremy Issacharoff, Israel's ambassador to Germany, thank you very much for joining us here on DW News today.
Thank you very much.